Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast. Today, we are so thrilled to have with us an amazing guest, Nicole Wolfe, who is the Senior Director and Head of Corporate Programs at ClassPass, which is the world's largest fitness and wellness network. So we are so thrilled to have Nicole here with us today. Thank you so much for being here. And to kick things off, we'd like to hear a little bit more about your career path, what brought you to ClassPass, and what keeps you motivated to inspire wellness at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here. So my career path is, I started sort of in the health and wellness space. I've been in this area for the last 15 years or so. And I started off actually on the more fitness side. So I worked for the fitness product TRX training, and I really enjoyed all of that and had a great experience, started a startup. And I think there were two really main takeaways from my time there. And one of them was the fact that I loved startups, and I really appreciated the scrappiness and ability for everybody to get involved, roll up their sleeves, make things happen. But I also recognized that there was broader opportunity for me to impact more lives through things like corporate wellness, behavior change, habit formation, things like that. I ultimately came to this sort of decision point in my early career where I felt like the fitness industry was a bit more of, we were helping fit people get fitter, and I wanted to have a bit broader impact. And I saw a lot of the things we were doing with our own staff that I believed would have had broader implications on the corporate wellness side. And so I made the early decision in my career to really focus in on that channel. And so I went to work for, one of those step tracker companies called the Global Corporate Challenge. They were based out of Australia. We were expanding into the United States. And it was a really smart product, and it was a really easy way. I talk about completely shifting from, really performance training athletes to just getting people to get off their couch and go for a few walks a day. And I think you saw the impact you had on people's lives and how easy it was to really drive change in a corporate setting. A lot of that comes down to culture and what you see at the actual workplace. But with that strong culture and what you see within employers, you're able to actually really drive a lot of change, which was really interesting and exciting for me. From there, I went to Kaiser Permanente. I thought that, hey, given my shot at some of these startups, maybe it's time for me to try my hand at a bigger organization. And so that, was incredible because we had a lot of resources. We had the ability to make really broad changes with many huge, large organizations, particularly in the public sector where they may not have been as well funded. And, ultimately I learned a lot, but I also recognized the importance of having that scrappy startup mentality, and subsequently had the opportunity to come to ClassPass to build out this program. ClassPass had not had a corporate wellness program when I joined, and so I had the opportunity to really be entrepreneurial and basically have a startup within a startup, and ultimately find the right, model, what the business would look like, what are we trying to offer on the backbone of this incredible network of fitness and wellness partners that was global. And it felt like a really great opportunity to have pretty significant impact in the corporate wellness space. And so I've been lucky enough to have been here for almost 4 years, and it's been an incredible journey, and we've had a lot of really incredible success, a lot of things that we've learned along the way. But I do ultimately think that this has been a great culmination of a lot of my background and skills, and I'm excited to sort of see our next phase of growth.
I love how involved in the wellness space you've been in so many different capacities. It's amazing. And it sounds like this new role is really exciting as well. Well, not new anymore, 4 years, but latest role.
Yes.
Actually, at my previous employer, we had ClassPass.
Nice.
So
exciting. I love to hear that.
Yeah, I loved it. I think I want to say that we rolled it out around the time that the pandemic hit. So it was very much aligned to what's going on with COVID. And I think that was extremely helpful for a lot of the people within the organization. So I definitely have had some some experience with what you all are doing. And speaking of the pandemic, so we know that there's been a lot of challenges to well-being with this global pandemic when it comes to obviously catching the disease, but also staying at home, working at home. What are the different challenges and issues there? And there has been a greater focus on wellness in the workplace. So we're super excited about that, and I hope you're seeing the same. But we'd love to know what your greatest challenges have been in your role today at ClassPass during this pandemic year.
I mean, I think we've all had the challenges of just individually adjusting to this new work from home life and figuring out how to juggle, kids, parents, spouses, whatever it might be, to figure out just how we're going to do this. And, humans are surprisingly adaptable. So I think we've, obviously I think many of us are excited to get back to work, but we've figured out our new routines and have been able to adapt pretty quickly. On the, macro view, ClassPass was impacted significantly. We work with lots of small businesses across the world. We're in 30 countries, and we work with, studio partners that have one local mom and pop location, and then we work with big chains. We work with wellness providers, that same thing, just their livelihood. And we saw a significant impact to those businesses, and we really focused our early efforts on ensuring that we were able to support them. So we found creative ways to prop them up. We created some donations within the app so people could support their favorite studios. We also have done, and then we quickly pivoted to live stream and digital offerings, which allowed our partners to also monetize what they were doing, trying to do on their own. And so this gave them a wider audience to reach out to. On the corporate side, we had, we were worried. We didn't know if the budgets would be gone. What were companies going to do? There's obviously a lot of layoffs and furloughs happening. So there was a lot of questioning around, are companies just going to see wellness as this ancillary perk that's really not actually important, and the last 5 years have all been lip service and checking the box? Or are they going to double down and really focus on wellness and making sure that their employees are supported? And by and large, it's been the latter. We've seen a lot of our companies that have really focused on providing solutions to their employees in this time. And it's been actually really inspiring to see the creative ways that companies have committed to their employees and figured out ways to provide solutions, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but we do know that people need those options, need things to do. And so we've seen a really strong outpouring of support from our corporate partners and wanting to really support their employees in this time. And so that was an exciting and inspiring moment. I think we all sort of had a little bit of a sigh of relief in a way, but we've been excited to see that. And we've obviously pivoted quite a bit. We've done things like private live streams for employees. So instead of doing a Zoom happy hour, you're doing a Zoom class with your colleagues, which has been fun. We've layered in new provider options. So things like meditation, mental health, nutrition, personal training. So trying to provide a multitude of offerings. So again, employees can find what they need depending on where they are in this journey in the pandemic. And it's been great to see it. And we're excited about sort of continuing on as we start to see this light at the end of the tunnel. Now we actually have come out of this as a much stronger and more diverse offering. We have more digital solutions. We have a broader network of providers. So, I think in a way it gave us the opportunity to reset a bit and figure out what was really important at the end of the day. And it's going to benefit our users in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It sounds like you've really been able to turn a lot of your challenges into opportunities, which is wonderful and makes me really happy to hear. When we're thinking about, and you just mentioned sort of having to broaden out your offerings and think about this in a way that might be a little bit more holistic, when we were doing some research on you and looking into your approach, we read that, you've talked about before taking a more holistic view on wellness, which we love, shifting people from calorie counting to really thinking about wellness as the totality of your health and really taking control of your self-care. So when did you first realize that wellness programs needed to evolve in this direction? And what have you done to push that dialogue forward at ClassPass?
I mean, there's so many layers to that question. I think, you have your individual journey of figuring out, okay, it's not just about calorie counting and going for runs every morning. There's a lot of elements there. And I think at the end of the day, and I said this before, if you're not mentally well, you can't be physically well. And you really need to marry those two layers of you, right? And that's a challenging thing. I think the other thing that's been interesting is Kaiser, to give them credit, really pushed on this mental well-being side of the wellness side, and we got an opportunity to learn a lot about the vendors that were out there and what people were doing. And I think the big challenge in a way is that companies have always felt like it's a little taboo to talk about. It's a little, it's a gray area. Physical well-being is an easy thing to discuss, right? Go get your 10,000 steps. Let's train for a 5K. Let's take a class after work together, whatever it might be. And so I sort of lovingly call physical wellness the gateway drug to overall wellness. I get people that, especially on a corporate side where they, it's an easy thing to start to implement. It's fun. It has a great message. It's not, there's no real gray area there. It's like, we're just trying to move more, and it's a pretty common thread. And so I think given that, what we've seen, and I mentioned this in the beginning, I think a lot of times physical wellness programs, if you're just rolling that out, you ultimately just see the people who are already comfortable being physical, just getting more fitness in their lives, right? So, which is great, right? We're helping everybody, but there is that element of how do you get those people who are absolutely never going to put on a pair of yoga pants with their coworkers and go to a class after work? How do you get them, to that next level? And I think that's really where it starts from that holistic point of view. You kind of need to think about what people need, and there's different layers to that depending on where they are. If you have somebody who's a 60-year-old smoker who's never left their desk, how do you start there versus somebody who's early 20s, a marathon runner, and is excited about that? And that's why I think it's so important to bring in these wellness programs pretty holistically, thinking about different offerings, and finding solutions that, meet employees where they're at and allow employers the opportunity to roll out a really broad-based program. And one of the things, certainly ClassPass doesn't hit all of those boxes, but I do believe that we've started to layer in many offerings that allow people some breadth of choice in what they want to do and figuring out those solutions. But I think ultimately it came down to this decision point where I saw people that, we were not treating the symptom. We were sort of creating a really fun, exciting culture, and it was great, but people were still, the people that really needed it weren't participating. And I think that was a big part of this, is how do we get those folks to join in and start to think about their own well-being, as opposed to, oh, this is just a silly, challenge I have to do, and I'm not going to be doing a 5K, so I'm just going to forget this whole thing ever existed and go back to my old habits. And that was the really sort of aha moment for me when I was thinking about these programs.
I really like the approach that's more individualized that you've just described, and I feel like ClassPass is the perfect platform for that, with all the different options that you have. Like I mentioned already, we were using this with my previous employer, and so I got to dig around a little bit and see, what were the different options. And I think that something that Katina and I talk about a lot is that it's not, like you said, it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody needs the same thing. People start in different places. We talk about within cultures too, like within organizations and in the research in our space, what different supervisors, different leaders have to have different approaches based on their team members, et cetera. So it's very much aligned with the philosophy that we believe in. So I'm really excited to hear how you're approaching it and how you're able to use a great platform to make things a little more individualized.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift gears a tiny bit. And kind of get into the academic stuff. Both of us are a little nerdy. We love our academia, and we noticed that you have a background in journalism and history. You also have an MBA, so you've got a lot of varied academic training. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how those different educational backgrounds of yours have kind of tied into your role, your work over time, and how you've really leverage all of that into where you are right now in the wellness space.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think when I was in undergrad, I focused my studies on communication and history. And I really, it's my first job was in political PR. And so I thought I was going to work in this political sphere and really change the world from that lens. And, I think there were certainly a lot of elements to that I enjoyed and learned a lot, but I definitely felt like there was a lot of spin going on. As we all know, politics is you have to be a special breed to sort of dive into that world. And so, I think I quickly understood that, luckily, that I really enjoyed this health wellness side of my life. I had sort of done this on the side my entire life growing up. I was always active, healthy, and I had this opportunity that came across my desk, honestly, to go work for TRX. It was not a plan. It was, my parents were horrified that I was going to this crazy fitness startup, and I was 22 and my whole career had sort of my path that I had set out, I totally abandoned. But I really stayed true to what was important to me. And I think that's something that you can do. You have the luxury to do when you're young, and really follow that through. And so I made that shift. And I think as a result of that, I had a great mentor. He was a Stanford MBA, and he was very, he understood. I came from an arts and science background, and there were elements that were sort of missing potentially from my education that I really wanted to dive deeper in. And so the MBA was obviously a great opportunity, but I particularly loved the program I joined at Babson that was very entrepreneurial and focused a lot on the practicalities of business as opposed to sort of the high level abstract elements of, accounting or something along those lines. It was very practical in nature, and I felt like I could apply it right away. And I'm very lucky that I had that opportunity to do that. And I think it's served me well because I understand both sides of the coin. I have that background that, data is important. You have to understand sort of the layers of a situation, like in a historical context, and why is a company culture the way it is? There might be some history there, and you sort of need to untangle that. But then I also absolutely now really understand the practicalities of that business side. And it's nice to be able to sort of marry the two together. And communications background never hurts, right? We all need to speak and write. So I think that, while it's been a sort of circuitous journey, I do feel like it was you sort of come into your own and figure those things out. And then, I think similarly, I'm a lifelong learner, and I think it's always great to be able to dive back into a new area of focus and study and broaden your background.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really focused on contextualizing the things that are going on, which is amazing, and understanding the background and what's come before and how you can move things forward, as well as how you can communicate those messages more broadly, which is really important in the wellness space for sure, because, wellness messages, as have been varied over time. They also have their own history.
Absolutely.
And trying to make waves in that space and sort of change people's mindsets around what wellness is and how it can benefit their companies. I'm sure both the history and the communications aspect plays a role in that. So that's really fascinating how those things come together. Speaking of history and thinking about the way in which we try to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself with regard to things that, we've tried before that maybe haven't worked as well, and considering how new things might fly in this space moving forward, could you talk a little bit about the trends that you think we might be seeing in the near future, or that might become increasingly important in the wellness space, and a little bit more about how ClassPass is leading the charge in some or all of those areas?
I love this question because I think the pandemic has, in a way, accelerated a lot of the trends that were already out there, like mental health and digital fitness and things like that. And I think it's just forced us to jump in with both feet and really dive in and figure out the solution. So I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm so curious to see how we adapt to this coming out of the pandemic. Are people going to go back, in droves? It'll be the roaring 20s. People want to go back into classes and go travel and do all these things, or are people going to be a bit more cautious? And my hunch is it'll be a hybrid approach. I think people are going to want to do both in-person and digital. I think the benefit of this, sort of focus on mental health and well-being will allow that conversation to feel less awkward and uncomfortable for a lot of employers, and it'll be a lot more of the forefront of our sort of national discussion, which is, I think, benefits everybody. And I do think that it'll be this digital wellness, fitness side of things. I think what we've seen, at least at ClassPass, is that, you know, most of our users want to go back to fitness and want to go back to their favorite studios and want to be in a spin class again when it's safe. And they want to feel that energy of, you know, their fellow, you know, Pilates colleague next to them, pushing them on. And I think that's a really important distinction here, is that at the end of the day, we believe in what we're seeing, and what our users are telling us is that, yes, the digital solutions are great, and they appreciate the fact that it's given them the opportunity to stay healthy and well while they're at home. But it's also been an interesting time to think through sort of the post side of this, and how are people going to get back into class. And what our users are telling us is they want to go back to class and they want to get back out there in the world. And so we're excited to see sort of that next phase. And I think, if anything, this is just going to provide more solutions and more offerings and more options for people as they come out of this. And they're, you know, if anything, this time has bred creativity, created innovation, and I think that is good for the user and the consumer at the end of the day. So we're excited about seeing what will come out of this.
I totally agree that I think a hybrid approach is probably where we're going to be headed. You know, having the digital options is amazing when you're really busy and maybe can't get to a class that's scheduled. But I also very much agree, and it's really interesting to see that you're hearing this from your users, that people want to come back in person. You know, we're social beings, and that is one of our needs from a psychological perspective. We need to have relationships and connections. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that you're seeing that your users want to go back in person when it's possible. So I'm very curious as well to see how this all shakes out over time. So when we're thinking about wellness, you know, we've been talking a lot about the users of ClassPass and just organizations in general, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your own ways of managing your wellness. You have had a very successful career, a lot of interesting work that you're doing. I'm sure you're super busy. So what are you doing personally to maintain your wellness?
You know, it's funny you asked that question, because I would say before the pandemic, I was probably not living the life that I was preaching in a way. And I was certainly, you know, we're in 30 countries. I was traveling a lot. My team was spread out across all these locations. I was on planes, and it was a very exciting and fun, dynamic time. But, you know, my own physical and mental well-being was suffering because I just didn't have that opportunity. And so the pandemic sort of, in an odd way, forced me to sort of rethink how I was approaching my own life. And I think there's things to, like, you know, I'm a big proponent still of going on walks. If, like, the very least, if you can't do anything, you can go on a 30-minute walk. And that is, you know, great mental reset. It's a great opportunity to get some fresh air, and you get a little bit of activity. So, you know, I think even if it's just around the block once, that's not going to, you know, kill you. So I do think there's things like that have really, you know, I've come back to a lot of my sort of, I guess, habits that I had formed. And I think that's the key piece to this, in a way, is that there's a lot of foundational things that we've done and, you know, I've focused on in my life. And I think that this has forced me to come back to basics in a way. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's, you know, eating healthy. It's getting enough sleep. It's getting outside. It's moving your body a little bit. And I think that's, you know, in an odd way, potentially wellness has overcomplicated the basics in a way. And I think at the end of the day, it's, you know, do the little thing you can. It doesn't have to be this big ordeal. Like, if you can't get to a class, that's okay. If you can't, you know, have this huge, crazy diet, it's okay. It's finding those small moments that are wins for you, and just sort of staying true to those, I guess, you're like kind of baseline and figuring that out. And I think that the pandemic has allowed me to reset and really think about that again, and focusing on those areas that I know are you know, that have helped me in the past and are, you know, continue to do so. And I think will carry me through into, my old age. And I think that's the other side is, this is also about longevity and wellness and, just being healthy. It's not just about, having a six pack and, looking great, which is also great, but you need that holistic approach and thinking through the things that are going to carry you through.
Yeah, I love that approach because I think a lot of times when people make things too crazed, right? We've got too many activities. We're overworking. We're overdoing everything. You can fall off completely. So, instead of really thinking about, okay, I'm going to try to do what I can each day and make sure each day involves some movement, involves some healthy eating, or, if you think about it as like, I either have to go to an hour-long class every day or do nothing, then, you could become stuck in this kind of like binary scenario. Whereas if you think, okay, well, today I'm going to go to a really great class. Tomorrow, maybe I'll stream something for 15 minutes that I watch, or maybe the next day I'll do a meditation or whatever. That it doesn't need to be sort of a militant approach, because then I feel like when you get disconnected from it, you're like, it's so overwhelming to get re-involved, but rather like that you're offering and encouraging people to take, again, this more tailored, individualized approach, but that it doesn't need to be also rigid. You can fit it into your life in a way that works for you. And then you're having a little bit of wellness every day, as opposed to sort of this all or nothing thing, which I think can be scary for folks to jump back into. So
Absolutely.
Easing in and giving yourself some grace, I think, is a really important message of what you just said.
Yes, we all need a little grace.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Especially after what has been an extremely tough year, that we all give ourselves a little leeway and credit for what we are getting done, right? Which is wonderful. So, kind of bringing everything together, our audience loves wellness. They love wellness in the workplace. That's what they come here for. What else do you think our listeners should know about you or your career path, or about what ClassPass is doing, or about wellness at work in general, that you think would help them to try to keep on track with their own wellness in a way that promotes longevity, maybe?
Yeah, I think I'll borrow your phrase, give yourself some grace, right? I think this has been a crazy year and a tough time, and starting small, even if you're the wellness coordinator for your whole team, and you're figuring out a new program, and you've been tasked with this big, huge, scary goal of, getting your employees well, that can feel pretty overwhelming. But start small, figuring out the things that are easy to implement, figuring out what your culture needs. And the same goes as you as an individual, and thinking about what are the things that you need that will help sort of nourish you, and providing flexible options for yourself, for your team, for your colleagues, and just knowing that there isn't a one size fits all. Everyone's slightly different. And it's great to try and to dabble and to figure out what that thing is. And I think that's why ClassPass is such a strong product offering, because it gives you that flexibility to try a meditation class one day, go to a spin class the next day, do a yoga class in your living room the next day. So I think that's a really key element to this. And, I would say the same thing if you're creating a new initiative, if you're driving new policies, there's so many layers to it, but break it down into bite-sized pieces, give yourself that grace to fail, and you'll learn a lot more in that process than you probably would if you're always successful, and you'll grow out of that. And I think we've seen that happen, in career paths, even at ClassPass, we've tried a lot of things and have failed. And I think that's a big lesson in this too, is that's okay. And just get up the next day and keep going.
Embracing the challenge and the failure, I agree, is completely important. And I also really love what you said about the bite-sized pieces. We know from like a goal setting perspective, that's very important, right? If you have a big goal, if you can't break it down into smaller goals, into smaller chunks, it's going to get overwhelming and you're not going to ever start. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah. I tell my team, every single person on my team has probably heard me say this a million times, but the one thing I can guarantee people is change. And we just have to be adaptable and deal with that. We're going to figure it out and be willing to take the risk. And you can always change. You can always make that move and figure it out. So I think that's just being flexible, learning that along your journey is really helpful too.
Yeah, and your goals are not set in stone because you made them.
Exactly.
So you need to change and shift depending on what you're doing. Yeah, exactly. Well, before we wrap, we do always want to end our interviews with a final fun question, so something a little bit less related. And so that's what we're going to do today. And hopefully you've had a second maybe to think about it. But what we want to ask you is if you could attend any kind of class taught by any person out there of your choosing, what would it be and who would teach it and why?
Ooh, this is a good question. I feel like my answer you probably have gotten before, but the happiness course at Yale, Laurie Santos, it's free right now, I believe, on Coursera, and I think it should be required for every person out there. I think it's now the science of well-being or something along those lines, but it's really about sort of what we just talked about. What are the specific little individual things that you can take away for yourself? I think if you're in the business of wellness and that's an area for you that you're focused on, it's also very helpful when thinking about your strategy and how you can approach it. But I've taken it, I've gone to it online. I think you just get something new every single time. And I think it's a very worthwhile, endeavor. And she's done a great job of sort of, breaking it down. You can go to the full course. There's quick tidbits online. So it's certainly well worth your time.
Awesome. So it sounds like you've taken the class, you would take it again. Maybe getting to meet her in person could be kind of fun too.
Mm-hmm. I know, what a dynamic. I also love the story of it was the most popular class at Yale, and what does that tell you about just the pressures that those students were facing at that time? And I think we've all related to that. So great
Definitely.
Story.
Awesome. Well, we love your response. If the folks who put that course together are listening, you have a fan. So reach out and coordinate. Maybe there's some synergy there. We really appreciate your time. We're so glad to have had you here. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. We are certainly fans of ClassPass, and we just really look forward to seeing what's on the horizon. We will keep it on our radar, and we hope our listeners will too.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the time. It was great chatting with you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Nicole for joining us. We had a great time hearing about her experience, both as she moved into the wellness space and her time at ClassPass. We will have links in the show notes for both Nicole's social media as well as a link to ClassPass. And we'd love to hear from all of you listeners, what you thought about today's conversation, what questions you might have. You can find us at contact@workerbeing.com, on our website, workerbeing.com, or on our social media at workerbeing on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.